Hello, good morning. This is Brigadier P.S. Gotra. Today we'll discuss chapter 5 of the book IPKF in Sri Lanka. The name of the chapter is Soaring of Relation. This chapter explains how relations first weakened and then collapsed. It traces the growing rift between India through the IPKF and the LTTE. The breakdown followed the Indo Sri Lanka Accord of July 1987. The author argues that India's intervention was a politically sound decision given the regional and the humanitarian context. But the slide into the armed confrontation with the LTT was the outcome of mistrust, duplicity, competing political aims, and a failure to align political intent with the operational realities. The chapter moves beyond simple blame to explore a murky web of apprehensions, propaganda, bureaucratic delays, competing mandates, and escalating provocations that cumulatively made the conflict almost inevitable. From the outset, LTT were reluctant collaborators with the Accord. Their core strategic aim, that is the Tamil Elam, was incompatible with the India's guarantee of Sri Lanka's territorial integrity. Public statements by Prabhakaran reflected this unease and an attempt to project that the LTT had been compelled into accepting the accord under the Indian pressure. The arrival of IPKF further threatened the LTT's self image as the sole protector of the Tamil interests. Welfare measures and the civil support by the IPKF generated goodwill among the civilians, which the LTT perceived as an erosion of their political legitimacy and influence. The LTT were also ideologically skeptical of the electoral politics, fearing that the ballots and the referenda would undermine their revolutionary authority. Compounding this distrust was the LTT suspicion that Indian intelligence agencies were backing rival Tamil militant groups. Even if untrue, these perceptions shaped LTT's behavior. In parallel, the revelation of an unwritten understanding regarding Indian financial and material assistance to the LTT, later made public, caused embarrassment and controversy, feeding narratives of the duplicity and hidden agendas of both sides. Over time, subtle shift in LTT conduct signaled a growing psychological distance from India and the IPKF, even as the LTT leaders publicly professed democratic credentials. The LTT systematically raised objections to implementation of the accord, aiming to portray the IPKF as partial to the Sri Lankan government and by extension hostile to the Tamil interests. Issues around the withdrawal of Sri Lankan armed forces from the public buildings became flashpoints. While the IPKF attempted to balance military practicality with the political sensitivity, recognizing that the relocation took time, the LTT framed delays as the deliberate bad faith. Similarly, frictions emerged over the return of displaced Sinhala families of the eastern province. The LTT alleged democratic manipulation, something like the colonization, to alter the electoral outcomes, while the IPKF lacked the intelligence and the administrative machinery to rapidly verify claims, resulting in the time consuming investigations that the LTT interpreted as the obstructions. The prisoner release issue further poisoned relations. While a general amnesty was envisaged, the Sri Lankan government sought case by case vetting for the non political crimes. The LTT demanded immediate release of all the detainees and refused to provide names, citing fear of targeted killings by the Sri Lankan armed forces. The standoff deepened mistrust with reciprocal accusations and the moral posturing. These disputes were not merely administrative, they were political instruments used by the LTT to mobilize public opinion against the IPKF at Colombo. LTT's formidable propaganda machinery amplified tensions. With newspaper, radio, television, and an international network of representatives, the LTT shaped narratives domestically and abroad. Press releases from Colombo, Madras, and Western capitals increasingly portrayed India's presence as a self serving rather than altruistic. Attempts to bait IPKF leadership into indiscreet statements underscored the LTT's strategic use of the information warfare. Despite IPKF restraint, the narrative of partiality gained traction, eroding the moral legitimacy of the peacekeeping mission. Public demonstrations outside IPKF camps became frequent. Crowds, often including school children, blocked access and presented demands. While the LTT disclaimed responsibility, the speed with which such protests formed and dispersed following LTT communications suggested orchestration. The IPKF exercised remarkable restraint, but incidents such as the breaching of a camp gate at Mannar, culminating in a fatal shot, hardened perceptions and allowed LTT to label IPKF as the killers of Tamils. This narrative shift was pivotal in transforming popular sentiment and legitimizing resistance against the IPKF in LTT discourse. In the eastern province, violence against Muslims attributed by the different sides of the LTT proxies or the Sinhala agents fractured communal alignments. The alienation of Muslims undermined prospects for a stable political coalition ahead of the referenda and the election. The IPKF, assisted by CRPF units, intensified patrols and convened community meetings, but limited intelligence and entrenched suspicion constrained effectiveness. The inability to attribute responsibility with certainty further eroded trust in IPKF's neutrality. As violence spread, Sri Lankan government pressured the IPKF to allow SLAF units greater freedom of movement to protect Sinhala populations. Granting this risked violating the accord and alienating Tamil opinion. Denying it fueled Sinhala grievances and political pressure in Colombo. Near clashes between IPKF and SLAF units illustrated how fragile command and control arrangements were. These episodes highlighted the structural weaknesses of peacekeeping mission when host nation security forces remain politically constrained yet operationally pressured. Evidence emerged of LTT preparations for renewed conflict. Unusual purchase of grease and polythene suggested weapon caching. Intelligence later indicated that the clandestine import of rifles, ammunition, and explosives from overseas, undermining the spirit of disarmament. The LTT's denial, coupled with the logistical sophistication, pointed to a strategic hedging, publicly engaging with peace while privately preparing for war. This duplicity eroded any remaining confidence in LTT's commitment to the accord. Efforts to establish an interim administrative council to administer the North and East were meant to transition from LTT de facto control to pluralistic government framework. Despite laborious negotiations and apparent agreement on the representation, the LTT abruptly reneged on a signed arrangement, citing objections to the chairman's selection. This reversal, despite the LTT's assured dominance within the council, suggested either internal factional disagreements or strategic decision to avoid electoral process altogether. The author suggests that the LTT may have concluded that sustained disorder could force the IPKF's withdrawal, leaving the LTT better positioned against Sri Lanka, state preoccupied with insurgency elsewhere. The episode demonstrated how fragile political compacts become when one actor views election as a threat to the revolutionary legitimacy. The death of the LTT leader Talipan, following a fast unto death, widened the emotional gulf between India and Sri Lankan Tamils. The photograph of Lieutenant Colonel, self-styled Lieutenant Colonel Talipan is given in the first slide. Although some demands were on track to be met, the fast proceeded, implying deliberate escalation. The symbolism of the martyrdom intensified popular alienation and delegitimized the IPKF in LTT narratives. This episode underscores how emotive political theater can overwhelm the incremental diplomatic progress. The interception of the LTT cadres by the Sri Lankan Navy and the subsequent cyanide suicides of the 12 prisoners marked a decisive rupture. The LTT framed the incident as a betrayal of the amnesty. The Sri Lankan government defended its legal position. The aftermath saw retaliatory massacre of the Sinhalese civilians and the execution of the captured policemen. The moral shock and the political fallout shattered any residual confidence in the peaceful accommodation. The IPKF, now compelled to protect isolated SLAF garrisons amid the spreading violence, became more dispersed operational, an unfavorable posture for massive operations. By early October 87, political leadership in India moved towards the authorizing force against the LTT. Senior commanders warned that a military solution would mire the IPKF in prolonged counterinsurgency. The decision to proceed despite force inadequacies reflected political expediencies overriding military prudence. The chapter contrasts this with the earlier Indian president, where political leadership deferred operations to ensure preparedness. The author argues that alternative levers, particularly political pressure via the Tamil Nadu's influence networks, might have been explored more decisively before resorting to the force. Demonstrative raids and targeted actions against the militant infrastructure marked the operational shift. The LTT responded with attacks on the IPKF and the CRPF units, confirming the transition from peacekeeping to the open hostilities. The psychological environment in Jaffna changed. Public spaces emptied, cadres openly armed, leadership went underground. Dialogue collapsed into fatalism, with LTT leaders framing war as a matter of honor. The chapter closes with the arc by situating the breakdown within the broader lessons on unilateralism, misaligned objectives, and the dangers of assuming the coercion can substitute for political legitimacy. The soaring relations was not the product of single betrayal but cumulative mistrust, contested narratives, administrative friction, and strategic hedging by the LTTE. For military professionals, the chapter offers enduring lessons. Peace operations require unity of political purpose, credible enforcement mechanism aligned with the mandate, robust intelligence, and the coherent information strategy. When political decision making outpaces military capability, missions risk sliding into protracted conflict. The IPKF's experience illustrates how peacekeeping can become combat when core stakeholders do not share the end state and when legitimacy erodes among the population one seeks to protect. With this, we have come to the end of this chapter. Thank you.